Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Becker. I'm with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. Welcome to the August edition of All Bugs Good and Bad webinar. It's brought to you by several community of practices, the Imported Fire Ants, Urban IPM, Bee Health, Invasive Species, and the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. During the webinar today, if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the left side of the screen in the chat box, and myself or one of the other co-moderators will be happy to help you answer them. Our co-moderators today are Sean Banks from NC State, Amanda Tedrow from the University of Georgia, Kathy Flanders and myself are from the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. Of course, today's webinar is on mosquitoes and minimizing their problems, and our speaker is Molly Keck. Molly is an integrated pest management program specialist with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in San Antonio. Molly received her bachelor's and master's degree from Texas A&M University, both in entomology. Molly has presented hundreds of IPM programs for children and adults at the local, state, national, and international level. At the end of the webinar, we ask that you take a few minutes and answer our 4 polling questions that will pop up on the screen. And then also on the last slide of the presentation, there will be a link to a more in-depth survey that we ask you to fill out. Please fill that out. It helps us out with future webinars and the changes that we need to make. But with that, we will go ahead and get started. And like I said, our speaker is Molly Keck from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Services. So Molly, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, well, I was just going to talk to you guys a little bit on this webinar about mosquitoes and trying to reduce the issues that occur when you have mosquitoes around. I'd say that mosquitoes are probably the most irritating of all the insect pests that we encounter. I don't know of anybody that necessarily likes a mosquito. And so just a little background information for you on mosquitoes. We have associated mosquitoes in mosquito habitats, which would be like swampy, wet kind of areas, with human disease for decades, hundreds of years. But it really wasn't until 1878 when they were formally incriminated with vectoring diseases. And so mosquitoes are definitely the most important arthropod insect that affects human health. And a lot of scientists believe that they're the deadliest animal in the world, not because when they bite you, they suck your blood and you die right away, but because they transmit diseases, vector diseases that eventually kill you. And there's a lot of different diseases that mosquitoes can transmit. Probably the worst is malaria, then there's yellow fever, dengue, West Nile, and then this new chikungunya that a lot of us are hearing about in the news. And so if you hate mosquitoes enough that you want to move somewhere to get away from them, unfortunately you really can't go anywhere unless you can stand the cold, because they're found in every region of the world, every continent of the world, except for Antarctica. And with 3,000 species, they basically have a host range of nearly anything that you can think of, even things that you wouldn't imagine a mosquito would feed on, like reptiles. They have a host range of that as well. So mosquitoes are everywhere. We either have to learn to live with them or learn some tools to be able to cope with them a little bit better. And hopefully that's the information that I can help you understand. And so I think that understanding the life cycle of a mosquito is extremely important, because if you notice, the majority of their life cycle is spent in the water. And so you hear all the time about reducing water habitats, and that will dump water and that will get rid of mosquitoes. Get rid of the standing water, mosquitoes won't be as active. And why that's true is because they need water to survive and to reproduce. So the mother lays her eggs on top of the water, the larvae hatch out of the egg, they feed in the water, eventually they become a pupa, and then the pupa hatches out, and that becomes the adult that flies off in the air. So only the adult stage is airborne or on land, terrestrial, and everything else is in the water, which is why water management is such a key issue when it comes with managing mosquitoes. And so there's a couple different species of mosquitoes, just to kind of help you understand what's biting you and when they're biting you. The Culex species of mosquitoes are the ones that we worry about most when we're dealing with West Nile. They're the primary vectors of West Nile. However, a lot of other species of mosquitoes can also transmit it, but these guys do it the best. And these are usually called the house mosquitoes. Sometimes there's a species called the southern house mosquito you hear about. And depending on what region of the United States you live in, you either have Culex pipiens or the quinifasciatus as the most common one. And these guys are the guys that come out. They're kind of brown in color. They're not very pretty. They just kind of look like an ugly mosquito. but they're usually active in feeding on you during dawn and dusk. And so when people say stay indoors during dawn and dusk, we're telling you to try to avoid these mosquitoes. However, a lot of us throughout the United States have another species of mosquitoes called the Aedes species, and these guys are active during the day. They can be found at dusk and they can be found at dawn, but they're also very active during the day. And these are I call them the ankle biters. They're the ones that feed around your ankles. They're sometimes it can be painful, and if you look at them closely, they're actually kind of a pretty mosquito. If you can imagine a mosquito being pretty, they have a real pretty white and black white color against a black background. And if you look closely at them and you see a black and white mosquito, it's definitely one of these Aedes guys. And these guys vector West Nile as well, but they're also important now because they're the primary vector of this chikungunya disease that a lot of us are hearing about. So again, it all starts with an egg. That mother has to lay her eggs on the water, and it's a pretty delicate process to get down and get those eggs on the water. So she's not going to be laying her eggs in fast-flowing streams, or if you have a pond and you've got a waterfall that's always causing ripples, you're probably not going to get a lot of mosquitoes even able to lay their eggs there. But water that sits and is stagnant and still is a great place for them to come and lay their eggs and want to live. And she'll either lay them in these little rafts like you see in the picture with the green background, or the mosquito that's laying her eggs in a big raft all together, or she'll lay them singly. And you can kind of see in the middle picture, a lot of these mosquitoes that lay their eggs as single little eggs have kind of inner tubes that surround them. You can kind of see that outline. And that allows them to float on top of the water so that they don't sink to the bottom. So eggs will sit on top. You can see them. A lot of times it just looks like a little bit of dirt or debris. When she initially lays them, they'll be bright white like you see in that picture on the bottom. And then as the sun comes out and as they kind of go through a tanning process, they'll get a little bit darker. But you usually can see them if you look close enough. So a mosquito can lay an amazing amount of eggs. She can lay 200 to 300 at a single time. She might lay multiple batches of eggs within her short little life cycle. She requires dirty, still water. If it's a pond that may not have any flowing water in it, but it's sitting in the middle of the sun, there's no foliage or anything that might be protecting it with some sort of shade, they're probably going to avoid that. But if on that pond you have some areas where the grass grows over a little bit, and so you have along the banks a little bit of more protected area, they're going to prefer that place to lay their eggs. But basically anywhere that holds water is a place where a mosquito can lay their eggs. I always tell people even a bottle cap that's turned upside down is enough water to hold mosquito eggs and for that mother to lay her eggs. And so it doesn't take deep water, and it doesn't take a whole lot of surface area. It's just as long as there's even a puddle on the ground. That Culex species that I was talking about, that's the house mosquito, usually lays their eggs at night, and amazingly, if she's laying almost up to 300 eggs at a time, she's laying 300 every 3 nights. So they grow exponentially, and that's why it's so important to reduce the water so that you don't have these massive blooms of mosquitoes. After the eggs hatch, the next stage is the larva. So these guys are just like, say, a butterfly, where they have the 4 life stages to their life cycle. The larvae live under the ground, and in these pictures, it kind of looks like these guys are hanging upside down, and if that's the way it appears to you, it's because they are. You can see their little black eyes near the bottom of the water surface. And those little tubes that you see sticking up are called siphon tubes, and they help them breathe. So it's kind of like Robin Hood with the reed above the water, letting him swim under the water but able to live under it. And so when you hear about adding oil or something to make even soap to make a surface tension, what you're basically doing is drowning the mosquitoes. You're suffocating them because they can't break through the surface tension of soap or oil, and they suffocate under the water. So it's a terrible death, and most of us that hate mosquitoes kind of want that kind of death for them. After they are finished being a larva, well, first of all, with the larvas, we call them wigglers, because if you jiggle the top of that water, you tap it, they will wiggle their way down to the bottom. So the way that they move is that name that they're given. They will molt about 4 different times, and this can take anywhere from 4 to 7 days. It depends on the species of the mosquito, and it also depends on the temperature. The hotter it is, like we're in right now, the shorter their life cycle takes to complete. So right now, larva stages for most mosquitoes are probably going to be somewhere about only 4 days. Now, these guys are really active feeders. This is the stage that you want to manage because they're actively feeding, and so a lot of the products that we can apply to the water is what they're going to ingest and get sick and die from. We consider larvae to be the easiest ones to manage because they're in the water. We can do something to the water, and it's kind of proactive. They're not out there biting us like it is when you're trying to control the adults. They really like dirty water. So if you have a pool that's always kept clean, you're probably in the clear. If you've got a pond that always has a lot of organic matter, a lot of debris, you've got a pot sitting outside, a bucket, something like that, that's what they're going to feed on. They're going to feed on that algae, the bacteria, and all that gross, gooky organic matter. So clean water is fine, but dirty water is always going to house and breed mosquitoes, larvae. The third stage, after they're finished being that larvae, have molted a few times, they'll finally become the pupa. And the pupa of a mosquito is really unique because most pupa of insects don't move at all. They're kind of in a chrysalis or a cocoon. They're in that pupa stage, and they're very still, and they're not very active. The pupa of a mosquito is active, and we call them tumblers because when you touch the surface of the water, they'll do somersaults down to the bottom to get away from you, so they tumble down to the bottom. These guys don't feed, just like all pupa of insects do. They're non-feeding, so if you see a lot of pupa in the water, there's not much you can apply to the water that will kill them because they're not going to feed on anything. If you kind of look closely, you can almost tell there's a little mosquito inside of that weird-looking kind of fetus-like body. And they breathe also from the surface. They use something called a trumpet that you can see in that top right-hand picture. So you can suffocate them as well, just like you can the larva. And so they are in the pupa stage for a very short period of time, only about 1 to 3 days. And then they will emerge as an adult. And this is an extremely delicate process as well. And so this is another reason why stagnant still water is very important to the mosquito, because if she or he were to topple over, if there was a little ripple, then they're going to die. They're going to get wet. The wings are too wet for them to fly off, and they're going to die. So still water with a lot of debris that they can kind of climb up on is really key to their development. And the adult stage, they will take flight as soon as they get out of that pupa stage, that pupa case, and they can't really fly very far. So once they've emerged as an adult, they're going to hang out very close to the water that they just came from. They don't initially go out looking for a blood meal right away. In fact, for the first few days, they'll actually eat nectar and honeydew, sugary type things, so that they can gather up enough carbs and energy so that they can make the long flights to mate and to find the blood meals. The females will mate once in their entire life. The males can mate multiple times, but that female only needs to mate once. She gets enough sperm that she stores in a little apparatus she calls a spermatheca so that she can reproduce and make a lot of babies all the rest of her life. What's one cool thing I think about mosquitoes, they're one of the few insects that you can actually tell the boys from the girls. The males have very fluffy, poofy antennae that are kind of feathery, and their mouth parts are a lot longer as well, whereas the females have more sparse antennae. So you could kind of equate it to like a deer or something. The males have big antlers, and the females really don't have anything. So in this picture, you've got a male on the left-hand side and a female on the right-hand side. And so if you really hate to kill things, if you see a mosquito buzzing around with really fluffy antenna, you don't have to kill it necessarily because it's not going to be the one that actually bites you. The females must take a blood meal because they need the blood to get the protein in order to produce the eggs. And usually the blood comes from a vertebrate. It always comes from a vertebrate, actually. And you can see in that picture on the right-hand side, it's feeding on some sort of a reptile. So mosquitoes don't just feed on warm-blooded animals per se. They don't feed on just mammals. They feed on all sorts of hosts. It's really amazing all the different things that they can feed on. And after about 2 to 5 days after they've taken that blood meal, they've already mated, so they need that blood meal to get the protein, develop the eggs, and then they start laying the eggs. So this life cycle from when that mother mosquito was laid as a little egg to when she's able to make eggs herself is very, very short, like within a 2-week, 2.5 to 3 week period. So that's another reason why getting on top of the water issue is really important, because it's very quickly that these guys can reproduce, and they reproduce pretty exponentially. The way that they find their host is also, pretty amazing. You hear all the time, I always get bitten by mosquitoes, my husband never gets a bite. Or if I'm in the middle of a room, there'll be 200 people around me and I'm the only one that'll get a bite. And the reason, and that's certainly true, there are some people that definitely attract more mosquitoes than others do for some reason. And it's just what your body is producing and basically your chemical makeup. So they're using a few different chemical cues and odors to determine where their host is. So CO2, if you're breathing a lot harder than somebody next to you who isn't breathing very hard, they're probably going to find you first. Lactic acid, so if you've just run a marathon, you're breathing hard, and you're really sore, you're producing more lactic acid, you're probably going to be the first one that mosquito finds, as opposed to your friend who just stood and watched you. Octanol is another thing that we produce that the mosquitoes find. And then just other odors. You know, women tend to attract more mosquitoes than men do because we use lotions, we use perfumes, our makeup has an odor to it, the shampoos and conditioners that you use have more of an odor to it, and just the way that you smell. Some people just attract more mosquitoes. And what's interesting is that certain people can attract different species of mosquitoes. Like maybe I attract more Aedes than I do the Culex. So even within the species of mosquitoes, you can attract different ones at higher rates. And then they also use visual cues. So if you're going to be outside gardening and you want to try to avoid mosquitoes, the darker your clothing is, the easier it is for them to find you. Contrasting clothing. So if you wear, you know, zigzags in your clothes or a checkered shirt and it's black and white, it's easier for them to find you. If you just wear kind of light-colored clothes and you're fairly still, they're not going to see you as easily as if you wear something very dark and you're moving a whole lot. And then also just the heat and humidity that's around you. In the Texas area, it's always humid. No matter where you are, it's always humid. And so we always have a lot of mosquitoes when we're outside because it's just humid. And they also will feed on a variety of different skin surfaces or be attracted to it. So some species of mosquitoes like the moistness, that kind of mucousy skin on the frog. Some of them like the scaly legs. Some of them even like matted hair on, say, a horse or something that's rolled in the mud. It really just depends on the species of mosquito, but I think it's amazing that they are so kind of host specific and they really don't care. They'll go after anything that they possibly can. They also can feed through heavy cloth. That's something to remember. The thinner your clothing, the easier it is for them to pierce through with their mouth parts, but the thicker your clothing is, the harder it is for them to cut through, which is a very hard thing to try to tell people because you don't want to be outside wearing denim all the time, so that you can avoid mosquitoes. This is a big blown up picture of basically the mosquito's head and its mouth parts. And in this picture, I can tell that this is a female mosquito because the antennae are very, they're not so feathery, they're kind of sparse. And I can also see that those things called the palpi are very short. A male's palps would be really tall. And that thing up there, the proboscis, might sound familiar because that's what we call kind of the tongue of a butterfly. It's basically the same thing on a mosquito. It's what they use to inject into our skin to feed on us. And the way that they feed is another kind of remarkable thing. They basically take that, you can see that little red piece right there that's entering the skin, and there's kind of a sheath that protects it. It's kind of like a sword that has you're putting the sword inside of the sheath, and when they want to feed, they roll it back a little bit. They kind of bend it in half, and they inject it into your skin. The females kind of backwash into you. You know, they spit into your skin as they're puncturing, and what this does is it basically prevents clotting. So as they're sucking, you're not making a clot, and then that is hard for them to suck up. But it's the saliva that causes an allergic reaction in humans and causes the itching sensation. And everybody has a different reaction to different species of mosquitoes. And you might notice this when some mosquito bites are really, really itchy, but they're tiny little bites, or they're massive, massive big bites. The difference in the reactions that you're experiencing are basically two different species of mosquitoes. A lot of people worry about the bite of a mosquito, and if enough of them bite you, could you possibly have blood loss? I guess it is possible. If they were biting you at a rate of 280 to 300 bites per minute, that could actually reduce your blood volume by 90%. I don't know who's going to be out somewhere where you're getting 300 bites a minute. I'm going to be somewhere inside as soon as I get more than 30 bites in a minute. But they definitely consume enough blood, and if enough of them are feeding on you, it could potentially reduce your blood volume. Sometimes we get kind of a secondary infection at the bite site. If you scratch it too much, you might get an infection. That definitely happens. But those two things really aren't major dangers or major concerns to most people. What should concern us more than anything are the different viruses that mosquitoes can vector and transmit to us. And in total, there's 520 or so The two probably most common ones, or the two that we think about a lot in the United States, are West Nile and then the new one, the chikungunya, which wasn't on our radar until this summer, amazingly. And then there's also some filarial diseases that they can transmit. If you have your dogs on heartworm medication, you're trying to prevent heartworms, which are transmitted by the bite of a mosquito. When you think of what we call mosquitoes, when we say that they transmit diseases, what we really mean is that they're vectors. They're the vehicle that can take that pathogen, the virus or whatever it might be, and bring it to a person, a host, or whatever whatever's trying to get the disease. So we have to have three things that must overlap in order for a disease to be present in the environment. You have to have the pathogen or whatever causes the disease. So in that case, maybe we're talking about West Nile. West Nile has to be present. You also have to have the vector, which is the mosquito, who can pick up the disease. And then you have to have some sort of a host or a reservoir. And so with West Nile, the host would be birds. They hold West Nile in them, although they really don't show a lot of symptoms. The vector comes and feeds on the host, picks it up, and now can come and feed on a human or another animal and transmit the West Nile virus. So West Nile's our pathogen, mosquitoes are our vectors, and then birds really truly are our hosts with West Nile. Humans are considered, they're called dead-end hosts, not because you die, but because it really doesn't build up enough in our body for another mosquito to pick it up. And it's hard for a mosquito to pick it up from a human and then transmit it to another human. We just don't have enough of the virus floating around in our body. So now you kind of understand the mosquito's life cycle and some of the concerns that we have about mosquitoes. What can you do, though? This is probably what you're most interested in. What you can do to actually get rid of mosquitoes. Personal protection, I think, is first and foremost the most important thing and probably the most effective thing. Reducing the breeding sites is also extremely important. The caveat to that is that the breeding site might be the neighbor's yard, or it might be 100 yards away and you can't really find it. Or it might be an easement that you really have no control over. So sometimes breeding sites, it sounds easy in theory, but it can also be very difficult to kind of pinpoint that. You can also try to reduce the adult populations. I know that the picture's hiding it, but what I'm trying to say is when it's appropriate to reduce them, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Sometimes it's just not feasible to try to reduce the adult population very much. They can be very difficult to manage. And then avoidance, if you can possibly avoid being outside when they're active. But like I mentioned with the two different main species of mosquitoes, they're active basically from the moment the sun comes up till the moment the sun goes down. So avoidance would be staying inside all the time, which isn't always easy to do when it's in the summertime. You hear a lot about the 4 Ds of mosquito control. In about, I'd say the early 2000s, when West Nile really kind of came to the forefront in the United States, there was a lot of public service announcements, at least in Texas, that we would hear about practicing the 4 Ds. And the 4 Ds are to drain standing water, to dress in long sleeves and pants because you're less exposed, less chance of getting a bite, staying indoors during dawn and dusk. It's effective against that Culex, that house mosquito, because those are the primary vectors of West Nile. And then DEET, or basically any other insect repellent. We say DEET because it fits well with the 4 Ds. But basically it's just personal protection. And so the 4 that I mentioned over here fit very well with that campaign of the 4 Ds. So to drain standing water, remember that the eggs, the larvae, and the pupa are all the aquatic stage. So they all must be in some sort of a water source. It's only the adults that are terrestrial. Since they absolutely require that water source, if you can get rid of it, you have broken the life cycle in some way. And again, it's not always easy because you may not necessarily know where that water source might be. But anywhere that water is standing is a place where mosquitoes could potentially be laying their eggs. And so I've got some pictures of some different things. An abandoned pool, you look over the fence at your neighbor's house and their pool's been abandoned, it's filling up with rainwater, or they just haven't been cleaning it at all, and so it's ugly, it's dirty, and it's got obviously a lot of debris in there. There's been leaves that are falling in there, and a lot of good organic matter. It's just a perfect place for mosquitoes to breed. In the state of Texas, it's actually against the law to have to be breeding mosquitoes or to have sites like this, and people can get fined and get tickets for it. So it's easy to see you have your big massive pool that might be breeding mosquitoes. What you might not notice is the kid's little tiny pool that you kind of pulled behind the fence or behind the house and you don't necessarily notice it. The other thing about those kiddie pools is that even when you pull it up and you dump it out, there's that little lip around the edge that can still be housing and holding mosquitoes. So you might think about, if you stand that up against your fence or your shed outside, every now and then roll it around and try to get rid of, after it rains, some of the water that's sitting in there. Some of these things, some of the ways that mosquitoes can breed can be kind of tricky. If you have tires are notorious for breeding mosquitoes because you can never really totally get all of the water out of those tires. There's always that little lip. There's always just enough for them to breed. So if you have any kind of tires around the house, consider rolling them pretty often, dumping out the water that's in there. And since the life cycle is so short, this is something you probably want to do every 3 to 5 days. Here's some more pictures of just some things that you may not notice. And these are all kind of junky yards. These are pictures that we've taken with our code compliance officers in San Antonio, Texas. And they're houses that people obviously aren't taking very good care of. But these are still things that you could certainly have in your backyard and not realize it. You've got a bucket or a pan that's sitting out and it's rained a couple times and there's mosquitoes in it. Pots from potted plants that you just don't, the plant has died but it's still holding some water. Just anywhere where mosquitoes can be sitting. And since this water is rainwater and there's a lot of debris and things that fall in it, it's just the best place for a mosquito to feed and breed in. This backyard's just kind of a big mess, but they've got a lot of things that mosquitoes could definitely be breeding in. They've got paint buckets that are turned over on their side. There's trash cans that have cans are open and the water's falling in there. There's a bird bath in the back. And then another thing that I notice is all that foliage everywhere. So not only do you have breeding sites for mosquitoes the minute it just has a little bit of a drizzle of a rain, but you also have a lot of hiding places for the adults to rest. So the mosquitoes are just staying in one spot. They don't ever have to actually leave. And these poor homes that you can see in the distance behind the fence are probably battling mosquitoes like nobody's business and don't have any idea how to get rid of them. And it's because this neighbor, unfortunately, is not cleaning up their mess. Here's just some more pictures of little things, buckets within buckets. One good example, I went around and did kind of a water audit at my house last summer, and I had a hummingbird feeder that they'd taken all of the food out of it, but it had rained and a little bit of water got into my hummingbird feeder, and sure enough, I had mosquito larvae wiggling around in there. So it can literally be anything, even if you're taking good care of your yard. It doesn't necessarily have to be a junky yard. Now this picture, you may not think this is a place where mosquitoes could be breeding, but I see this wood looks water damaged, so it's sitting, it's settled, and there could be water in some of these areas. You have that soda can that could possibly have some water sitting in it, and definitely that hole is big enough for a mosquito to fit through. Just lots and lots of debris over here in the right-hand corner where certainly mosquitoes could be laying eggs if you just have a little puddle. Here's just some more stuff. These are just kind of all pictures of what seem to be junky yards, but we certainly, I think everybody can probably agree that we might have one or two of these things sitting in our backyard that we just don't want to deal with. More things. The more stuff you have, the more mosquitoes you're going to have. Sometimes the water meters, if they get clogged up or if the hole is big enough or you've had a good rain, this one isn't necessarily clogged up, but the water's just sitting in there and you've got all that grass and organic matter, there's probably a lot of mosquitoes being very happy in that spot right now. Now in this picture, you don't necessarily see anything, but what I noticed from this is the corner of a house, and obviously the gutter, or when it rains, the water is running off and it's sitting. You can see that algae kind of sitting in the bed and along the outside of the bed. If there's algae there, that tells me there was enough moisture. It was standing long enough with a lot of organic matter. There was probably mosquitoes breeding in this site. So even when the water is dried up, sometimes you can kind of see some spots where the mosquitoes could be breeding as well, or were breeding. Inside of a house, especially abandoned homes, a lot of times you'll have toilets that are still full, just kind of get gross, or you've got water that sits in a tub, and these are definitely places to breed mosquitoes. Mosquitoes can breed inside. They don't necessarily have to be outside. Maybe you have a 2-story house and you don't need to go upstairs anymore because your kids are gone. You might want to go up every now and then and flush that toilet, or make sure that the drain isn't backed up in the tub, just to make sure you don't have water sitting somewhere. In this picture, I just see all sorts of places where mosquitoes could be. They're probably living underneath this house. You've got the potted plants everywhere. You've got the little cat that's a host, potentially. This was a little old woman's house who was just complaining like crazy about mosquitoes. And when we went out there and took a look, She had water sitting in all of these buckets and potted plants, and she was the one breeding the mosquitoes and didn't even realize that she was doing it. Here's some more pictures of just potted plants. If you garden, you're going to have mosquitoes, unfortunately. So you have all these breeding sites. Hopefully now you can walk around outside, maybe pinpoint some places where the mosquitoes might be hanging out. What can you do about it? If you're able to, drain that standing water, dump it out. If you're not able to, it's a bird bath and it's way too heavy, number of different reasons why you maybe can't do it. There are definitely other options. My favorite option is these little mosquito dunks, and sometimes they come as little granules, and it's BT. So it's Bacillus thuringiensis, which should sound familiar if you like to garden and you try to control caterpillars. But this variety, Israelianensis, is specific for just mosquitoes. So you can throw these dunks inside of a horse trough, a bird bath, an abandoned pool, anything, and your birds can drink from it, your horse can drink from it, you can swim in that pond if you want to, you can drink from it. This bacteria only affects mosquitoes, so it's very, very host specific. So you can be rest assured that you're only going to hurt the mosquitoes, you're not going to hurt anything else. It lasts for about 30 days, right at about a month, and then you have to throw more in to replace it. What you should look for, if you have huge larvae or you have a lot of pupa and not very many larvae, remember that the pupa aren't really feeding they're not feeding at all, in fact. And the older the larvae are, the less they're wanting to feed. They're getting ready to become the pupa. So you might want to save the dunks and do something else because you're not going to kill pupa with this. So that's important to remember. Then there's these little gambusia fish, the mosquito fish. And I'll have to admit, I know people that have them, but when I ask, where did you get them? They say, I don't know, somebody had them and they bred like crazy and I got 20 from them. I don't actually know where you can purchase them, if it's at pet stores or if you get them online. Everyone I know that has them got them from somebody else. But this little gambusia fish, it's kind of like a little guppy, but its mouth is oriented in a way that it's able to scoop up larvae from the surface without disturbing the water surface, so they don't flitter down to the bottom of it. So that's why it's called a mosquito fish, because it's the best at feeding on larvae because their mouth is made to do it. Now, so it's easy to find the larva sites. Maybe if you can find that standing water. The adult sites are what a lot of people really try to focus on because they don't like the adults feeding on us. We tend to not think about it, not think about standing water and what it's going to produce, and we want to do something once the mosquitoes come after us. And so this backyard, the same picture that you saw earlier, is a fantastic resting place for adults. Anywhere where you have dense foliage, a lot of ground cover, plants of any type, you're going to find a lot of mosquitoes. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a yard that isn't well maintained. Very nice maintained yards such as this one can have tons of mosquitoes in them. In this yard in particular, I was out doing a site visit for some ants, and I was standing under these trees right here, and in the matter of like 5 minutes, I probably had 10 mosquito bites all over my arms. And her yard didn't have a lot of standing water that I could see. It was well maintained, but she just had a lot of foliage around. It could have been 5 houses down that had the standing water, maybe an abandoned pool or something like that. But they were coming into her yard because she had a lot of foliage, and probably everybody else around her just had a regular lawn without a whole lot of plant material or even a lot of trees. So even nice yards will house mosquitoes. If you have plants, you're going to have mosquitoes. And ways that you can reduce those adult sites, if you can trim back the foliage in some way, just reducing the places where they can hang out and hide. A lot of mosquitoes will feed on birds when they roost at night, so they'll even go up high. I'm not saying cut down your trees and get rid of all of your nice things, but that's probably what's going on if you have a lot of mosquitoes in your yard. You just have a nice yard, basically. You can keep the grass cut, take down the brush, just reducing the places where they can sit. That will help reduce the adults a little bit. And then excessive ground cover. Basically, mosquitoes will be from your feet to above your head. I mean, there's not really a good range that you can try to focus on. They're pretty much everywhere. And if you can't trim a lot of that stuff, or if you do, it's not doing very much for you, you can apply pesticides to areas that look like they would be a place where the mosquitoes would hang out. And I always say only if it's warranted and if you want it. I wouldn't ever recommend doing it, of course, if you don't want to. But a lot of times, treating for the adults doesn't produce the results that a lot of people want to see. There are a lot of reasons why. You get resistance very easily. especially if you are treating with the same product, the same active ingredient over and over and over again. Resistance is always going to happen. It's either chemical resistance or maybe they'll make some changes to their behavior. You start killing off the ones that are at your eye level and you're only keeping the ones that are way up, that tend to nest up high above your head. And they start, for some reason, they have some trait that tells them hang out up high. You've killed off all the ones that are in the area you can treat, and you're sending everybody else up high and keeping those guys, making more babies that want to hang up high. Also, when you spray, you're really only killing a few adults, because what you have to remember is that, remember the mosquito's mouth part. It doesn't chew on anything. It has a very tiny little tip of a mouth part that enters your skin, and you usually don't feel it, so it's very small. They touch the plants with the tips of their little teeny tiny toes. And so when you spray something on your tree and a mosquito lands on it, it really has to hopefully spend a good amount of time, touch that tree quite a bit, get enough pesticide to penetrate so that they die from it. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. Even if they land on the tree, they don't get enough pesticide to actually die right away. And so that for that reason, mainly, I don't ever recommend only spraying for the adults. It's definitely not the best option for you, and definitely not the most environmentally friendly. There are a lot of different products out there. This is a list of some of the active ingredients that you can look for. Of course, you want to use something that's a liquid. If anyone's trying to sell you a granule or a bait for mosquitoes, they're selling you snake oil. It's not going to work. So there's foggers and then there's foliar sprays that you can use. Definitely read the label of what you're using. Make sure that you don't apply more often than what the label recommends, and don't apply, if it says mix an ounce with a gallon of water, don't mix 2 ounces with a gallon and hope that you'll kill twice as many, because you won't. You'll just get resistance twice as fast, and then you'll have a much bigger issue and not really have anything in your arsenal to try to kill them. If you are going to use the sprays to kill the adults, what I would recommend is do it either dawn or dusk. Maybe not necessarily in the middle of the day, because the UV light will probably break that pesticide down pretty quickly. And also, I would use these products when you have an event coming on. Say that you're having a party in your backyard, or you're going to be barbecuing for the neighbors. Treat that morning and then treat a few hours before the event is going to happen. But if you're out there trying to kill the adult mosquitoes every day because you garden all the time, you're going to be spending a lot of money and wasting a lot of pesticide and really not killing a lot of mosquitoes. You'll be killing a lot more beneficial insects. If you do spend a lot of time outside, the much better option is to use personal protection. Try avoidance. Wear the loose-fitting clothing. The tighter the clothes, the easier it is for that proboscis to penetrate. Choose light-colored clothing also. And then definitely wear insect repellent. And I know there's a lot of controversy around different types of insect repellent. People, don't like to put it on. But to be quite honest, mosquito repellent has saved so many more lives, and there's not been a case where it's been shown to lose a life. And there's a lot of different options for insect repellent. Every insect repellent is not equal. Some of them don't last a super long time. Some of them will last much longer. So read the label, get some information about it, make the proper choice for the situation that you're going to be in. If you need long-term mosquito control, or you're just running outside to pick your tomatoes, maybe you just need something short-term. I pulled this little quote off of the Environmental Protection Agency's website, and this is from a long time ago, from 1998. So it's, people hear about wanting to avoid using DEET. And DEET has been around a very, very long time. The EPA has done a lot of work on it. It's a very good insect repellent. There shouldn't be a major concern about health concerns for it, is basically the point. The EPA has done multiple comprehensive surveys and studies on it to determine that when used properly, and that's the key, read the label, know how much you can use, know what age group you can use it on. When used properly, it shouldn't be a health concern. So what we recommend is we have to recommend products that have been approved and labeled by the Environmental Protection Agency. Even repellents are considered as a kind of a class of insecticides. They repel an insect. And so there are lots of home remedies that people say, and we don't recommend them simply because they haven't been tested to be able to be used on humans and licensed for that use. And so this list might seem short, and it might seem very little, and it's basically for that reason. And so the EPA approved products would include DEET, picaridin. There's a product called IR3535. IR3535 is one that you find a lot of times in oil of Olay products. However, it's not the oil of Olay products that my grandmother used to use to try to soften her skin. These are actually oil of Olay products that say insect repellent on them. Citronella is another one that's been approved. This one that is hard to read. 2-Eudecanone is another one. Oil of lemon eucalyptus, and then even catnip. I guess if you really like cats and you hate mosquitoes, you could kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And then beyond that, though, we can narrow it down even further because the EPA has approved these guys to be used on human skin, but the CDC has approved 3 of them because they provide long-term repellency in order to reduce your likelihood of transmitting or contracting a disease from a mosquito. And those 3 would be DEET, picaridin, and it's hidden behind that sign, but oil of lemon eucalyptus. So you kind of have a more natural option if that's the route that you want to go. So EPA has a lot that they approve. CDC has 3 that they really look at as well. And the EPA has a really cool website. If you just Google EPA insect repellents, they have a little table, a drop down, and you can put in what insect you want to repel, ticks, mosquitoes, things like that, and then the amount of time that you want that product or that repellent to work. And it will spit out an answer for you in a bunch of different options. And it can be any of these that are listed here under those EPA-approved products. So it's kind of a neat tool that those guys have for you if you're interested in looking at that. And again, like I mentioned, not all formulations are equal in repelling mosquitoes, even in people, even in individual people. Some repellents don't work quite as well as the other ones do. They vary based on the mosquito species. So some repellents like DEET might work really great against Aedes, but maybe not quite as well against other species of mosquitoes. So remember that. If you're using a product that worked really good in your backyard, but you went camping and you used it and it's just not working as well, there's just a different bunch of mosquitoes around. So don't assume that, oh, this stuff has gone bad, or, oh, it doesn't work anymore for me, something's happened to it. Every situation is going to be very different. Unfortunately, there's not a silver bullet for anything. And then even among the types of products, there might be gel-based products, there might be the oil-based products, whatever the matrix is that repellent is sitting in can also act differently on the species of mosquitoes. So just to kind of touch up again on that, on DEET, and there's so much controversy around it, and so many people are very concerned and scared with it. There have been no links with DEET and deaths, thankfully. There's been no direct links with DEET causing or enhancing certain medical conditions. There have, however, in literature been links with epileptic individuals, and they've always been young individuals, youth, that have had a seizure after using DEET sometime in a 24-hour period. But the thing, I wouldn't get real scared from that. What I would take from that is that these individuals were epileptic to begin with, and so were they in that 24-hour period going to have a seizure? Whether they use DEET or not, who really knows? But there have definitely been cases of individuals who have had an epileptic episode after using DEET sometime within 24 hours. So maybe if your kids are epileptic, maybe don't use DEET, use another product. All of these products can have dermatological issues to them also. For example, my husband can't put picaridin on. I can't even put it on, and then he can't do my laundry because he will get a major allergic reaction. So even though they've been approved by the EPA, anything can elicit some sort of a reaction. So be careful if you're using it for the first time. Like anything, use it on a small part of your body. And so that's kind of mosquitoes in a nutshell. Hopefully that kind of answered some of the questions for you. I know most of you guys wanted a silver bullet. What can I do to get rid of mosquitoes? And unfortunately, there's just not one thing. It's a combination of personal protection, reducing the larval sites, and trying to avoid the adults when they're hanging around.
Thank you, Molly. That was excellent information. I'm sure everybody's going to be able to take away something from your presentation. At this time, we'll continue to take questions if there's any in the chat boxes. And I'll go ahead and advance to the last slide to show you this, to link to our more in-depth survey. Again, we ask that you guys to take a few minutes to fill this out for us. It's really going to help us out. And then I believe Jeannie's going to post the 4 polling questions for us. There we go. So please fill these out. And again, the survey from the link. And don't forget next month's all Bugs Good or Bad webinar, and that will be on the kudzu bug and the brown marmorated stink bug. So I'm going to go ahead and mute, and again, we'll take any questions that we have through the chat box. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next month.
Hey, Molly, this is Kathy Flanders. I really enjoyed that webinar, and I've got a question. You may have mentioned it, but if you go to Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart and places, you can find those little things that you put on your belt that you supposedly wear these things instead of putting on insect repellent. What are those, and do they work?
Well, I guess it depends. They are like little fans that basically has a pesticide in it, and so it makes a little cloud around you. So what I have learned from those is that the less that you walk around, the better it's going to work. So if you're outside gardening and being pretty active, I wouldn't waste your money on it. But if you're just sitting, you're enjoying your coffee in the morning, something like that, and you're a small individual, then it's probably going to work pretty well for you. If it's real windy, it's going to blow that stuff away, and it's not going to stick around you. They can be effective. For me, they're not real good because I'm pretty tall, so I almost have to put one on my knee and then up on my shoulder. So I think you could save more money and get more bang for your buck by just using a regular old repellent.
We have some other questions here. I'll take this one, Chris, and then you can get the next one. Are rain barrel overflow spouts large enough to allow mosquitoes to breed in?
Probably so. It doesn't take very much. If you're using rain barrels, just put all you need is a really good window screen, some sort of a filter over it that isn't large enough for the mosquitoes to go through. But also be careful if your rain barrel fills up too high and it the surface kind of laps up close to that screen that you have up there. The female can still kind of stick her rear end through there and lay her eggs on top. So just if you think the spout's going to be big enough, just put some sort of a screen on there. That way they can't get in. And then I see a question, does the mosquito app for phones work to keep mosquitoes away? No, it doesn't. There's a reason that app is free.
Molly, what about the question related to the different kind of plants that are listed to discourage mosquitoes? Can you talk on that just a second?
Well, there are different plants that they say discourage mosquitoes with, and they can have a little bit of repellency, but you have to sit right next to the plant. So even if you have a citronella candle outside, you have to be sitting right next to that candle for the mosquitoes not to want to be around you. So some of those plants can work, but you'd have to fill your entire yard with it to try to make some sort of a barrier, and you'd probably be spending a lot more money than you're probably going to get effort out of it or results out of it.
Another question. Yeah, optimal temperature for mosquitoes?
Just basically anything above 65 degrees. The warmer it is, the happier they're going to be. So hot summer days, we have more mosquitoes for a reason in the summer, and that's because it's warmer and they reproduce a whole lot faster. We also water a lot more. We don't realize that. We water a lot more, and it might be sitting longer. So, there's not really a true optimal temperature. I think it would vary based on the species, but anything above 65 degrees, they'll be active. Adding chlorine, well, if you've got birds and other wildlife that are, the question is about adding chlorine to a waterfall and the water sits underground. And I wouldn't add chlorine to the water just so that wildlife doesn't get into it, drink it, and get sick from it. If I would imagine what you could probably do is throw a mosquito dunk in it, run the waterfall. If I'm imagining your waterfall and how it goes underground, let it kind of circulate a little bit so that it's sitting everywhere, and maybe that would get it all throughout the water that you've got all over the place.
Molly, it looks like that may be the end of our questions, but, oh, never mind. We'll hold that thought.
Okay.
Okay, I think that is the end of our questions. Molly, again, thanks for doing the webinar for us. It was outstanding. And folks, don't forget about next month on the first Friday for kudzu bugs and the brown marmorated stink bugs.